So yesterday we talked about the idea of satisfaction. That really the blessing that you want from the material world is to be satisfied with what you have. Now, it also speaks about this year and all its kinds of crops. In the Hebrew, the word tvuasa is from the word bo, which means to come. It means all the things that are produced. I don't think you have to think here agriculturally specifically. And it says, for the good. And this, I think, doubles the idea that we're not asking for a lot. We're asking for an amount that will actually be beneficial. So, for example, if it was up to you to determine how much rain would fall in the coming year, you could do some studies. We're talking about, let's say, the land of Israel, and see what's necessary. And you could say, okay, if you're asking me, so and so many inches of rain. But if you don't specify how they fall, when they fall, your words could come true as a gigantic blessing or a gigantic curse. Imagine that all the year's rainfall falls in 4 days in a row. That would be a gigantic disaster. There would be gigantic floods, destruction, death. On the other hand, suppose it falls on every day of the year equally, then it'll be too thin at any one time to do much good. It needs to be semi-concentrated during certain periods of the year, and other parts of the year could be without. We here typically get rainfall 4 months a year. And if it's enough rainfall, then the country flourishes without any rainfall whatsoever in the other 8 months. So it's not enough to ask to have X amount. It's also a question that it should be, in fact, for the good. Other commentators point out it's not enough to specify how much you get without knowing how much you're going to have to spend. Think of the Israeli economy on October 5th. If you predicted what its prediction would be for May of 2024, without knowing that a giant war was going to take place, then your prediction would have been entirely different. Now that it's a gigantic expenditure just in order to pay for the war expenses, the economy is going to be entirely different. So we're specifying here, we want it as a blessing and we want it for good, because just saying that we should have a certain amount or even a lot doesn't determine that it will be by itself for good. And then when we said yesterday, satisfy us from your goodness, I think there's a double message here. You could take it superficially. Of course, if you give us, if our interaction with the natural world produces enough to serve our needs, so then we'll be satisfied. And of course, because we have a religious philosophy, we know it's coming from you, and we'll be grateful to you because you provided it for us. But there's a deeper possibility here, and that is that it will come in such a way that we'll know it's coming from you. Satisfy us with what we experience as your goodness coming to us. That means that part of the satisfaction comes from the fact that I know it comes from you. I see that it comes from you, not that it's like interpret it as a consequence. We in this land had an experience 20 years ago. We had 5 years of drought in a row. It was so severe that people who know these things and understand them said it would take 5 years to make it up. As a matter of fact, that winter was all made up in one winter. One rainfall season, to the extent that they had floods in Tveria. By January, there had been no rain at all. So there was a giant gathering to pray for rain at the Western Wall. If I remember correctly, the estimates were something like 100,000 people were there. I was on a bus with many, many other people going to the wall, and one guy there was carrying an umbrella. I thought, let's see now, the rain is already 3 months late. I haven't had a drop. Okay, we're going to pray for rain. That's true. He's bringing an umbrella. I mean, okay, I suppose it's nice, Well, it started to rain while we were there. It actually started to rain while we were there. So you go through that experience and you know it wasn't raining and it's a drought and there's a danger, and you go and you pray and you get rain on the spot. That's the second dimension of satisfy us with your bounty. And this concept is captured in a pair of ideas, a pair of expressions. Now, I will tell you at the outset, I'm a little uncertain about it because to me, the two of them read very differently. And there's a passage in which the Rambam uses them one after the other as if they're synonymous. So I must be missing something. I'll tell you what they say, and I'll tell you why they seem different to me. One is that it's a Jewish virtue to be mistapek b'mu'at, means to make do with only a little. To make do with only a little. The other phrase is to rejoice in your portion. Now I hear a world of difference between those two phrases. First of all, if I'm making do with a little, if I define it as a little is a comparative term. Little is always defined in comparison to others. When people complain today of the state of the economy and how difficult it is and how little they have, what they don't take into account is that they have more than at any time in the last 3,000 years. But they're not comparing with the past 3,000 years. They're comparing maybe with last year with what they had, or with people down the block what they have, or what the top 1% have. It's a different comparison. So you talk about a little, you're a person who's describing what he has in terms of how it relates to others. And secondly, mistapek means I'm making do. That doesn't describe me as happy, rejoicing, but I'm not angry, I'm not rebellious, I'm not upset, I'm not sad, I'm not depressed, I'm making do. I'm managing, which is a Jewish virtue. Rejoicing in my portion means two things. First of all, I'm happy. And I'm happy with it because it's my portion. Now, what does that mean? It's my portion. Well, I guess you might say, I earned it honestly, so, it belongs to me. But a portion is something which is usually given. It's assigned to someone. I know that this is what God chose for me. He had me in mind when He dealt me this hand, as they say, when He provided me with these resources. What more can you have to rejoice over that God is watching me? He's managing my life, taking my circumstances, my hopes, my dreams, my needs, my fears, all into account, and giving me this. The very fact that it is my portion from Him is what makes me happy. Those are two very different attitudes. And here, when we say, satisfy us with your good, the second level is because it comes labeled, or because I see in it something that He chose for me, and that being the case, that will satisfy me. It won't leave me feeling, I really ought to have more. I really should have done better, because this is what was chosen for me. Okay? That's the attitude towards the physical world. One of the names of God, we don't have it in the Shmone Esrai, but it's not a very commonly used name. It's spelled Shin Dalet Yud. And the Talmud explains one aspect of the name as saying, He is the one who said to the world, enough. And the picture is, at the beginning, when the world was created, it was expanding. And at a certain point, God said, enough. Now don't talk to me about the Big Bang. First of all, according to the Big Bang, the universe is still expanding. Second of all, according to what the Talmud says, it's matter and energy that are increasing. There's more and more contents to the world. According to the Big Bang expansion, it's space that's expanding, matter and energy are not increasing. So this is not a picture of the Big Bang. It doesn't mean that 3,000 years ago we knew about the Big Bang. We're not saying anything like that. But let's understand what's communicated by this picture. The creation process starts, and it delivers more and more. The contents are expanding until God says, enough. What position are you in when you're watching something expand and say, enough? The position is that this thing that I'm watching expanding is a means to something else. When I say enough, I mean I have enough for what I'm going to use this for. Like good enough, right? And here I'm talking about amount, but yeah, good enough would have the same. Well, I'll say, by the way, there's a wonderful motto in English, which I think is very useful. The excellent is the enemy of the good. Because if you demand of yourself only to produce excellence, you won't achieve it and you won't do good things either. If you're prepared to get an A minus or a B plus, you can do a lot of good. If you're only going to turn in A pluses, you'll do very little, if anything. So here it's the physical world expanding, and God says enough. That means the whole of the physical world is only a means. It's a means to something else. That's why you can measure it and say enough. Now that's the attitude which enables us to be satisfied with the amount of physicality that we've achieved, because it's only a means. If the physical were an end unto itself, the more you have, the better. Why should you ever call a halt? But since it's only a means, you measure what you have against. My example for this, my parable for this is, some of you probably know that in the mountains in New York, it's a place where in the frum communities, they often spend their summers. The husband works in the city, goes to the mountain for the weekend, the same families in the weekend in the mountains. So there are trips back and forth from, let's say, New York City to the mountains. 2-hour trip, 3-hour trip. The husband's coming, it's Friday afternoon. Well, the schedule didn't work out exactly to his ideal, and it's late. And the gas tank is only an eighth full, and that's not enough gas. He needs half a tank to get there. Pulls into a gas station, he says, "Give me half a tank." And the guy says, "I'll give you a whole tank." "Oh, you can't afford it? You have a nice car." "No, I need to get there on time. I don't have time for the extra gas. I need just enough to get there on time." So when it comes to the tank half full, you say, "That's enough. I'm going." That's what it means to stand outside the physical and look at the physical as a means, and then say, "That's enough." So that's the heart of the blessing here. You're able to take that stance vis-a-vis the physical. And I want to mention this to you because you have an opportunity, I think, to experience this while you're here. Those of you who are only here for the summer, go around. Go out for Shabbos, go to families for Shabbos, go around, take a look and see how Jews in Yerushalayim live. I think if you're coming from a normal American background, some of it is pretty shocking. Could you imagine a family with 7 children in 3 bedrooms? 1 bedroom for the parents and 2 bedrooms for 7 children. I don't know what the theories are today, but when I grew up, it was psychologically recommended strongly that every child have his own bedroom. You try suggesting that to a family that you go to. My wife has 14 children, Leah and Haran, and she lived in small quarters. And at one time they were living in an apartment, and she had 6 kids in one room, and she was able to curtain off an alcove from the living room at night, which would be just a place for 1 kid to sleep. So she said to the 6 kids, "Which one of you would like to sleep in the alcove?" They said, "What did we do wrong? Why are you punishing us? I don't want to leave the rest of them. I want to be together with everybody else. Why would I want to be alone?" Oh, so maybe it isn't a psychological necessity that every child have his own bedroom or her own bedroom. So when you look at the style of life and the level of life, no carpets on the floors, just stone floors. Okay, some places have fancy stone. Still, you think, what would happen if someone lived at this level of physical resources in America? He'd be below the poverty line. There would be social workers coming in to attend to his needs. He'd be on welfare. Look at them. Are there people sitting out on the stoops doing drugs? Are there people drunk in the streets? Do you hear about suicides there? Not really. Maybe it's possible to be happy and inspired with less of the physical. Maybe. That's a lesson to learn and to think about. What am I planning to do How many hours a week am I planning to work? How much money am I planning to make? What kind of, 2 cars, one for me and one for my wife? Plus, as the children become 18, a car for each kid? Is that what I'm planning for? Why? Is it necessary? What am I trying to achieve? Those thoughts are important to meditate on. You could gain a certain amount of direction in life if you took them seriously, to think, what is the physical going to be used for? I will take this one step further. My first mother-in-law had an experience which she shared with us, and I think which communicated something very profound. She lived through the stock market crash in 1929. You probably read that during that time there were people who lost all their money and committed suicide. They jumped off buildings. The question was raised, suppose such a person, while he was alive, had lost a child. Child died. Would he have jumped off a building? Did you ever hear of a parent who lost a child committing suicide? I'd never heard of it. Well now, follow it up. Suppose in 1927, 2 years before the crash, you had asked this person, what do you love more, your money or your children? He surely would have said his children, and he wouldn't have been lying. He wouldn't have been lying, but look what happened. When he lost his money, he committed suicide and left his children orphans. It means that if he had lost a child, he could live with that. If he lost his money, he couldn't live with that. So what really is he more invested in, his money or his children? Sounds like his money, even though he wasn't aware of it. Again, I'm not saying he was lying, but he doesn't understand his own psychology. He doesn't realize that losing a child he could live through, but losing his money he couldn't live through. Money has a way of stealing your identity without your even knowing it. You become dependent on a certain style of living without knowing how dependent you are, and you make all sorts of sacrifices for it, not even realizing what you're doing. And especially if you live in a society where everyone's doing the same thing, then you do it because that's what everyone's doing. This exercise, what we're learning now, what I'm telling you, I hope should raise your consciousness to at least think about it. At least think about it. So when you go into it, you make a choice and you think about the reasons for the choice, rather than just following the pack. Yeah.
Right, that couldn't just be that the person, when a person has a child is like external value, while the ability to earn money and to have money is something that person takes like oh, that's my power, that's my value, that's what I.
Well, that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem. But he wouldn't, if you asked him, what do you love more, your money or your children, he wouldn't say that. He'd say, because this is my power, I love this more, and that's why I like my money more than my children. He wouldn't say that.
Yeah, but if you ask him what makes him great, he wouldn't say his child, he would say his money.
That's the problem. That's precisely the problem. Because but when he says he loves his children more, he doesn't know that. He doesn't realize that he's identifying with his power to make money more than he's identifying with his children. That's precisely the problem. He doesn't know that. He's not aware of that. He answers, I would say, culturally in an expected way. Of course I love my children more. And it's not true. It's absolutely not true. But I'll push this a little step further. This is a kind of morbid exercise. I'm not recommending that you should have to do it, but if you think at the end of your life and you think of your epitaph, there's your tombstone. Let's imagine they write on your epitaph all the things that you feel you were successful at. Now you just imagine, what would you like to have written on that tombstone? What would you like to feel that you succeeded in doing in your lifetime? Here's one that I think, my asking people, no one even thinks of. That doesn't occur to them. I succeeded at having a happy marriage. Really? I think the attitude of many people about that is fatalistic. Either it will be happy or it won't. I mean, I'll try, but it's not in my hands. I can't make it happy. Either I married the right person or I didn't. I tried, I did research, we spent time together, but either it happens or it doesn't. But it's not true. It's to a very great extent the result of the commitment and the consistency and the creativity of the two members in the marriage. So it really ought to be there. If you think of it as something that you would like written there, then you're going to take an entirely different attitude towards it during your lifetime. So These are things which, same thing with your children. You're invested more, you think of yourself more as a money maker than a father. That means you're probably not doing much as a father. Probably not doing much as a father. Because no matter how complicated and subtle you have to be to make money, it's much more difficult to raise a child. Much more difficult. Anyway, okay, I'm sort of going off on a tangent. Okay, let's go on to the next. 107. Sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise the banner to gather our exiles and gather us together from the four corners of the earth. There are two symbols here. What do you notice about the choice of the two symbols of the announcement of the freedom?
Shofar, banner, and what's the third one?
No, two. I said two.
Two.
What do you notice about them?
They're visual or at least relatable. Like shofar, you hear, you go by shofar.
One is visual and one is auditory.
Auditory, yeah.
Blowing the shofar is something you hear, and raising a banner is something you see. What's the difference between an auditory signal and a visual signal?
Different senses. They appeal to different senses.
Yeah, but now think socially. Think socially. Think economically. Think in terms of effectiveness.
If you see it, it'd be more effective.
If you see it, be more effective. I think you said it right. If you see it, be more effective. Why don't we give a visual warning of a missile attack?
Because people will distracted.
What? Why don't we give a visual warning of a missile attack?
Because it's too effective. More people can hear voice.
I can't hear you.
More people can hear voice.
More people can hear voice. Yeah. How many more?
Everyone.
I mean, if it's loud enough, everyone will hear it. If it's visual, then almost no one will see it, right? Anybody who's indoors isn't going to see it. Anybody who's pointing in the wrong direction isn't going to see it. Anybody who's interested in something else is not going to turn to see it. Auditory is much more effective. That's why all major public signals are auditory. They're not visual. They don't send us smoke signals. They don't wave a flag. A signal to teach you about something, to inform you of something. Okay. Now here you have two, auditory and visual. So now, to get the visual, you have to be with your eyes open, pointed in the right direction. So if I were writing this prayer, I wouldn't write it this way. I would change the order. I would say, give a visual signal. That visual signal will be captured by the elite, the people who know what the score is and know what the variables are and know where to find signals, and they'll catch it right away. And then for the rest of the population who aren't sensitive to the visual signal, then give the auditory signal. That's where I would have written it. But since it's not written that way, so I'm definitely missing something. Yeah.
Like, I think the audio gets people's attention, they look out, and then they see the video.
Okay, so now you're answering, right. Now, okay, and then you have to say, if so, why do we need the visual signal at all? Why isn't the auditory signal enough?
Some people won't believe it.
When you see something has more of an impact, like
Okay, so I think that's right. In fact, one of the things that's right. What you see has a much greater impact. It also could be much more specific. Although you might have different patterns of sounds for different signals, but you trust your eyes because they give you much more information than your ears. So it could very well be, that's one way to explain it, that the auditory catches your attention, but then the visual has that impact. Now, let's take that and use it to analyze something. This is not something that's often discussed. In the Talmud, when you want to initiate a discussion, there's a certain invitation. In the Talmud, it is Toshma, come and hear. That's the Babylonian Talmud. In the Jerusalem Talmud, it's Tor Chazi, come and see. so it is also in the Zohar. Tochami, come and see. Those are two different invitations. And the experience that they're introducing you to are different experiences. When you talk, and in fact, the Talmud remarks, there's a verse, B'mach shekim, Hoshivani Hashem, Hashem placed me in a dark place. That's Babylonia. Well, in the dark, the only way you can communicate is by voice. In the light, you can show pictures. You can give demonstrations. In the dark, it's only by voice. Think of the difference. Voice requires attention and memory. Because if it's more than 2 sentences long, you got to remember 5 minutes from now what was said at the beginning in order to get the message, put it all together. If it's visual, you can show the whole thing in one shot. So, auditory is slower and requires a much greater effort from the one who's going to really receive the signal. The visual is much more immediate and has much more, bigger impact, and it carries greater credibility. There's a big difference between Babylonia, where it says, come and hear, let's have a verbal discussion, versus the Jerusalem Talmud and the Zohar, which is also composed in Israel, where it says, come and see. And the capstone is where it says at Sinai that they saw the voices. Which means that which is usually communicated by voice, received through hearing, taking time, requiring memory, requiring attention, could be absorbed visually. None of us understands what that means because it refers to an experience that no one has ever had. But you see that the Torah cares about the difference and cares to tell us that at Sinai something absolutely unique happened, that these two different modes of perception were crossed in this way. And by the way, this is not synesthesia, because in synesthesia, when you hear a trumpet, you see red, but you hear the trumpet and you see red. It's just that one causes the other. That's not that's synesthesia. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, but the redemption, the announcement of the redemption is going to be carried by these two types of signals. These are both based on verses in the Tanakh. The authors of the period didn't make this up. They took it from the writings of the prophets. Now, this blessing in gathering the exiles marks a break. Up until now, the blessings that we have had apply to individuals and local communities and local times. The first 6, knowledge and repentance and forgiveness, and God investing in our battles and providing healing and health and sustenance. All of that each individual could say about his own individual circumstances. From here on out, they're national blessings. Blessings about our national future. Ultimately coming to the Messiah, which is 5 blessings ahead. And here, I think it's important to notice, we're now giving blessings for national redemption and the Messiah. And the first blessing is the blessing of the ingathering of the exiles. If you think that the order here counts, then you're going to draw the conclusion we're not relying on the Messiah to bring in the exiles. We only ask for the coming of the Messiah after we ask for the ingathering of the exiles. And that's absolutely correct. The order here is based on a Talmudic passage in Megillah. And this is one of the possible scenarios with which history will close. That the ingathering of the exiles and the restoration of justice and even the rebuilding of Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple could happen before the Messiah comes. There are other possible scenarios, but one has to realize that this scenario is legitimate. Those people who think that we are in the beginning of the redemption can't be disproved by saying, no, the Messiah has to do that, and if the Messiah isn't here, then all of this doesn't count. It doesn't prove they're right, but it can't prove that they're wrong by saying the Messiah has to do it, because here this is being understood as prior to the Messiah's arrival. That's just a semi-political remark. Okay, the next one is restoration of justice. Restore our judges as in earlier times, and our advisors as at first. Let's see, we want justice, we want a judicial body which will be faithful, trustworthy, honest. Okay, I hear that. We'll talk about why that's important in a few minutes, in Yetz Hashem. Why would you put advisors in here? What have advisors got to do with justice? Here's a feature of the Jewish court procedure. There may be other systems that do this as well. I'm not knowledgeable enough to say. But when you have two litigants who have a dispute and they come before the court and they state their claims, the first thing the court does is try to engineer a compromise. Why would they do that? I mean, they came for a judgment. The law can be investigated. The facts can be verified. And the law often tells you when these and these are the claims and these are the facts, then this is how you should do it. Give all the money to this one, split the money, impound the money, put him in jail. I mean, there are lots of things that could happen. Why would Eitzah, advice, in particular advice to make a compromise, be the first step? And by the way, one of the ways that this is administered, of course, if you know this, then you can take it into account, but one of the ways is this. The judges hear the claims of the two parties, and then there's a recess, and one judge goes to one party and says, listen, your situation is complicated. I just want you to know, as a matter of fact, there are three major authorities against your position. You should just know that. Meanwhile, one of the other judges goes to the other guy and tells him the same story. You should know your situation is not clear. It's not obviously going to win because there are three authorities against you, and they're both right. Because it's a controversial issue. And there really are three authorities against this one, and there really are three authorities against that one. That's to soften them up. That's to create a doubt in their minds. Maybe I'm not going to win, because there are these three authorities against me. Then when the court offers a compromise, they'll be more likely to accept it. If they don't accept it, and they demand that they want the strict legal ruling in the case, then the court is duty-bound to give it to them. But the first step is to try to engineer compromise. Why would that be important? What function would that serve?
They're trying to minimize the damage that might each side take.
Trying to minimize the damage that might occur. Where is damage going to come from? Hold on a second. Where is damage going to come from? Who's going to be damaged? Is it right to cause the damage, wrong to cause the damage, or what else is there that might motivate the court to try to promote a compromise?
In one case, they both get something, the other one loses everything and one gains everything.
Okay, in this case, they both get something. Let me make the question more pointed to respond to your suggestion. Let's suppose the judges look at it and say, he's going to win. If we give him a strict judgment, he's going to win. Which means that according to a strict judgment, he should win. And the other guy shouldn't get anything. Why then would we propose a compromise in which the guy who according to strict law won't get anything should get something? You might think of that as a perversion of justice.
More peace.
Oh, more peace. Peace between who and who?
The two arguments.
Okay, first of all, it's likely that there'll be more peace between the two of them if they agree to a compromise. Even agree with pain, even agree grudgingly. That's not the same as the court saying you win and you lose and imposing the loss on the other guy. There's a reasonable probability that the guy who loses is going to be bitter. He's going to be bitter. In his mind, it's very easy for him to twist the events and say, I didn't get what I deserved. If he comes to think that he didn't get what he deserved, he's going to not trust the court. He's going to complain about the court. And he's going to be complaining about the other guy because he's going to say he got something he didn't deserve. And that's going to cause all sorts of bad consequences between the two of them for sure, and also what he will say about the court. This happens often. It's very difficult for people to accept the fact that, there's two things here, to accept, any one of them to accept the fact that he's wrong, and even worse than my being wrong, it's that he's right. I don't want him to be right. I wouldn't mind so much if we were both wrong. I would take that. But he's right? I'm not taking that. So, in order to preserve the good reputation of the judicial system, in order to preserve some level of peace between the two of them, the court suggests a compromise. Because in the end, to answer the question I raised before, but it's not fair, because he deserves more according to the law, if he agrees to a compromise, it means he's giving up his legal claim, whatever it is. Okay, a person can do that. And a person can say, look, the court case would have taken 3 months, and I haven't got the 3 months to spend on it. It's not worth it. If I could have gotten more, it's not worth it. He's giving it up voluntarily. So it isn't an injustice. So part of the implementation of justice is that justice should bring about peace and reconciliation among people. It isn't just the law says, and the law was followed, end of story. There's a care for shalom together with the idea of justice. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It means that the broader context in which justice operates has to be taken into account in the actual operation of justice itself. This is similar to a plea for mercy. I don't know if you've ever seen statues of justice in the ancient world, of the spirit of justice, but usually those statues are blindfolded. Why? Because the law shouldn't take into account who's being judged. It should apply the law according to the definition of the law. That would mean mercy has no role. Mercy says, I know I did wrong, I know I'm guilty, I know the law says I should pay, but please don't make me pay. Excuse me, we're giving out justice here. But we don't do it that way. Plea for mercy is definitely in place, and the application of justice is supposed to be together with the desire of creating peace. Now, who had a question here that I didn't answer? No, okay. So now, look what this blessing says about the lack of justice. Restore our judges and our advisors at first. Remove from us sorrow and groan. Because our judges today don't have the status of the earlier times, because they aren't as faithful, as reliable, as credible as in earlier times, we are living with sorrow and groan. I saw this with my own eyes. I made 2 trips to Mexico. And in Mexico City, there were 16 million citizens living in Mexico City, 3 million homeless. I asked people there about the economy, and they said, we have the natural resources to be the 5th richest country in the world. Oil and uranium and gold and whoever. So why are there so many poor people? And the answer is because everybody in authority steals it. And they gave me 2 examples. Number 1, there's a city on the west coast of Mexico which is owned by one person. One person owns the whole city.
Big as a city.
That's big for even for Los Angeles, right? How did he do that? Very simple. He was a general in the army, and he commanded the army to build him a city. And that's his city. That's graft, okay? That's graft, big. using public money to build yourself your own city. That was one. And the other one, the guy who was driving me in a car and was pulled over for speeding, he said, watch, I'll show you something. The cop comes up and says, you were speeding? He says, yes, I was. And the cop says, give me $1. So the driver says, I was speeding. Give me a ticket. The cop says, give me $1. So he says, I understand. I was speeding. I was breaking the law. Give me a ticket. The cop says, I have a wife and children. Give me $1. Stopping people who are speeding is a way for him to make a living by taking money for the guy who was speeding. He's not interested in enforcing the law. That's nothing to do with it. He has a badge so he can get money. That's why they're all so poor. They're all so poor because there's no justice. Justice is what engineers the appropriate distribution of the resources that you have, and justice is what gives people confidence, willingness to play fairly in the context of the society. You know that in 1989 the Soviet Union fell. Before that, Ohr Somayach sent people to the Jews who were there, the refuseniks, to try to help them. The KGB always knew who they were and they knew where we were going. Sometimes they got it, sometimes they didn't. One friend of mine who was there told me that he was in the park in Moscow and a Muscovite was there selling burnt out light bulbs. Wow. Why would anybody buy burnt out light bulbs? Here's the answer. You buy the burnt out light bulb from the guy in the park. Then you go to the factory where you work. When the supervisor's not looking, you unscrew a burning bulb, a good bulb, and you put in the dead bulb. And you put the good bulb in your pocket. The supervisor comes around and sees a dead bulb. He takes out the dead bulb, goes to the warehouse, gets a bulb, and puts a fresh new one in. And he sells the dead one to the guy in the park. Got it? Everybody's ripping off the system. Why are they doing that? Because the system's ripping them off big. They're slaves to the Communist Party who are living like kings, and they're living on starvation. So, and they know that. They don't believe the propaganda that they're told in Pravda. They know what it was, so they look for ways to cheat. So having a judicial system that you can trust creates the confidence of people that's worthwhile playing by the system, because the system is a fair system. If it isn't, people are cheating. If people are cheating, then a lot of people are going to suffer. A lot of people are going to be victims. So the blessing here is very realistic. If we don't have judges, as were in former times, that you can trust, then there's going to be groaning and sorrow in the community, in the population. And that's why we say, restore them so as to remove from us groaning and sorrow. Now, reign over us, you Hashem alone. We're asking for restoration of judges, and you should be our king, you should reign over us alone. Might that not be a kind of contradiction? Reign over us alone, but you have these people who are in authority, and they're going to make decisions, and they're going to determine outcomes. Doesn't it sound like they're also reigning over us, or running our lives, or taking charge of things? What would the alone mean, so that there could be judges and they could make decisions, and they could decide what the outcome should be, but still we would say that only God is reigning over us? How could you work out the two of them together?
Judges can make only a subjective opinion, and they cannot account or evaluate all the fact objectively. The only person who even the only one who is able to make objective and the most justifiable verdict is God Himself. It's going to be for your own good.
Okay, but now you're now, I think, reiterating my problem. The blessing starts, restore our judges. That means the judges should be there. We want them back. What do judges do? They make decisions. And as you said, they're human, and they make decisions on the basis of their best understanding, but it could be wrong, and could be even prejudiced in certain ways. Even good judges could be prejudiced in certain ways, short-sighted. They don't know everything, they're ignorant of certain things. And then we say, God, you should reign over us alone. That sounds like a contradiction, Jeff, for the reason you just said. Reign over us alone would mean all decisions come only from him and from nowhere else. But now we just ask for the judges to be restored. So how do we live with the two of those together? It has to be that we can trust that the judges represent what God wants. That way, they're just bringing to us God's justice. Now, let's press your question, but maybe that's not true, because maybe their suggestions are mistaken. And the answer to that is God's rule for how the community should run is that we should have judges who make human decisions with the possibility of mistake. That's how he wants it to run. There's a famous case in the Gemara. This has all sorts of implications. The famous case in the Gemara where there was a disagreement in the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is 71 members, and it was 1 against 70. Rabbi Eliezer took a position, and everybody else was against him. Well, decisions are taken by votes. It was clear who was going to win. But Rabbi Eliezer was a very big scholar, so he wanted to have a discussion. Maybe they could come to an agreement. Rabbi Eliezer was adamant. He took his position. The others were all against him. There was a certain interaction, and finally at the end, Rabbi Eliezer said, if I'm right, let a voice from heaven proclaim that I'm right. And a voice from heaven proclaimed and said, Rabbi Eliezer is right. He's always right. Okay, what to do now? Well, they took a vote. It was 70-1, and the law was established against Rabbi Eliezer. Whew, that's a little dramatic. How could they vote against him when a voice from heaven said he's right? Well, Rabbi Yeshua, representing the majority, said the Torah is not in heaven. The Torah is not in heaven. So we're not listening to what heaven says. Wow, that's bold. You're just sort of ruling God out of the consideration, right? Well, as a matter of fact, the words the Torah is not in heaven were written by God. It's the book of Deuteronomy. So Rabbi Yeshua was just quoting what God himself said. So in a certain sense, God is sort of testing them. You have this disagreement, it's 70 against 1. Decisions are taken by a vote. But I'm going to tell you the one is right. How are you going to handle that? Rabbi Yeshua said, I'll handle it the way you told us, that the Torah is not in heaven. Okay, but then isn't it a little odd that God gave us a procedure which determines a false outcome? Shouldn't that be questioned? Why would the system be set up in such a way that sometimes you know you're going to get a false outcome? So let me tell you something. The United States' current legal system has exactly the same outcome. Exactly the same outcome. Consider the following case in United States law. Let's suppose that a person is accused of a crime. And let's suppose the prosecution introduces as evidence a wiretap of his phone. So they play the recording of his phone in front of the jury, and it's absolutely clear that he's guilty. No question about it. And then the defense says, we have discovered that the police had no court order to tap his phone. The police tapped his phone illegally. Well, there's a legal principle in America based on a Supreme Court decision. Evidence gathered illegally is inadmissible in court. You can't use it. What happens now? Well, the recording of his phone is thrown out, and if that's the only evidence, he has to go free. But everybody knows he's guilty. Everybody. The judge, the jury, the public, because it's been publicized, and yet he's going free. Isn't that somehow a miscarriage of justice? No, justice means using the legal rules. Not using what you know, but using the legal rules. And the legal rules say here, this kind of knowledge, though it's genuine knowledge, you do know he's guilty. And you're right, he is guilty. but you can't use that knowledge to convict. That's what the legal system requires. Here, God said, I don't want you to use information from heaven in making your legal decisions. I want you to make it on the basis of your human understanding. That's the law I want you to live with. That law. So that answers your question. Even though, vis-a-vis the abstract law in heaven, they may be not agreeing with it, but in terms of the actual way of administering the law, that's what God wants. Yeah.
I think there's a saying that, like, in, like, you know, court cases, it's, like, not about what you know, it's, like, about what you can prove. So, like, with the Torah, I guess, like, since we, like, know it's true, that means it's, like, it's good to follow. Is that what this is? I don't know.
Yes, I think really there are two issues here. One thing that the law has to do is decide how should you come to a decision. We have a rule in our legal system that what a person says can't be used against him. Not only if you torture him, but what a person says can't be used against him. You have to have evidence other than just his admission. So I say, I trust him, but I can't use that to decide the case. By the way, I haven't looked this up, but I think that this is indicative in American law. When you ask a jury for a verdict, what are the two possible verdicts they can give you?
Not guilty.
What?
Guilty or innocent?
Nope. Guilty or
Not guilty.
not guilty. They're very different. Because not guilty means the prosecutor didn't prove it. Maybe he's guilty, but he didn't prove it. He's not guilty. Guilty has to mean the prosecutor succeeded in making a case against him beyond a reasonable doubt, and therefore we pronounce him guilty by law. They don't say innocent because they don't know what happened. Maybe he is guilty. Maybe the prosecutor just didn't find enough evidence or didn't argue clearly enough. I think that's why it's not guilty or innocent, it's guilty or not guilty. Yeah.
And there's also the case where if they convince the jury that he's guilty, he might also be innocent the other way.
That's true. So okay. So I think that also supports the idea that when they say guilty, they don't mean that's what happened in the real world. It means the legal procedure leads to this way in which the law should treat him. It's not making a judgment about history, making a judgment about what the law requires. I think that's right. Anyway, so here we have the foundation of what the legal system is supposed to accomplish and who they're supposed to do. And as we said, it means it's not inconsistent with God reigning over us because we have to be convinced that the legal representatives are doing what God wants done. And in particular, what he wants is that human beings should use their fallible judgment to make a judgment about what should be done, and that is what we should follow. Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi.
so tomorrow we'll have this new rule coming in.